So you can't see nothing no more. Hi, my name is John Matthews. I'll be your host, MC, DJ, and crazy uncle who asks for money every couple of years. Welcome to Nerd Night Tokyo. First timers in the room. First timers in the room. Woo! Thank you all for coming. Wow, come back more, please, the rest of you. Because y'all gotta make up for that. No, what are you doing? So, I had a thing I was going to say here, and we have many things we want to tell you, but at the very beginning, I think we should say that we are streaming live. Unfortunately, Andrew is right in front of my camera, and is making messages. Yeah. This is my friend Andrew, he's not right. But before we talk about that, Andrew is not rightness, our friend Amanda, who put this whole thing together, has an announcement for you. Please listen carefully, as our options have changed.
The airbags will not be falling from the ceiling at any time. Happy New Year, everyone. So glad to see you here. It's Nerd Night with the theme of crypto. The housekeeping announcements, as always, if you've heard this before, the toilets are right around the corner. Don't wear your shoes on the risers. Smoking go outside. What else is there? Food and drinks.
Actually, Amanda, one more thing. The lock on the right-hand toilet, push it in really hard.
Okay, unless you want to be surprised by company in the toilet.
Amanda and Jill, yes.
Yes.
Exactly. As always, we're on social media. John is Facebooking stuff.
I'm not, but I'd like to be.
You can tweet us. The link to our live stream is on our social media, even as we speak.
Yes.
Follow us for all the news, Twitter, Facebook. And our friends at Space Cafe are back on the 23rd. That's not next week, but the following week. They're going to have Aurora. If you were here in December, Aurora gave the solar eclipse talk that was really, really well received. She's going to be speaking at Space Cafe on the dark side of the universe. So that's January 23rd at Good Heavens. Check them out. Our next event in February will be on the 9th. That's in 4 weeks. We'll be right back here in the basement talking about space art, controlling light with Mark. Where are you, Mark? Woo! Mark is speaking next month. And social agnosia. And if you have no idea what that means you have to come to the talk to find out. February 9th, all the information will be on our website, tokyo.nerdnight.com, as well as on our social media very soon. And I'm not going to read everybody's names. You guys know most of these people who make this event, along with me, John, Andrew, and so forth. You can see their names here. Let's just give them a round of applause. They make this happen. And these are our speakers tonight. First, we're going to have Rod. He is at RDVIII on Twitter, speaking about his quantum MOOC. Then there's going to be a Q&A, then a break. Then we've got Morgane, who's going to talk about fluorescent proteins, and maybe we'll turn down the lights so you can see some glowing stuff in the dark. Then another Q&A and a break. And finally, Eli, who's going to talk about his sci-fi novel and other stuff. And then a Q&A. So that's how the evening is going to go. John and I will be directing the Q&A. We'll have mics running around the room. If you have questions, keep those in mind. And now I think it is back to our weatherman.
Thanks, Phil. Amanda, not Phil. By the way, before we start, one thing, well, actually, another quick question. First timers, yeah, all right, whatever. Do you know how Nerd Night works? Does anybody not know what Nerd Night is like? Okay, so what's going to happen coming up very shortly? Because you realize we never tell you all this because a lot of newbies. 3 nerds walk in, and 3 nerds walk out. We're not savages. But 3 nerds walk in, deliver 20 minutes. 20 minutes. Where's Rod? I can stare at him meaningfully. 20 minutes, and wherever Eli was, of awesome talks about whatever the hell they're really passionate about because they're nerds. Now, are you a nerd? Do you like something so much you could talk about it for 20 minutes with data-driven things? We have former speakers in the house tonight who were, at one point, audience members, I believe. So, if you have something you can talk about for 20 minutes, which I do not, but you might, come on out, come see us, talk to Amanda. She's really good at vetting talks and seeing if you're a moron or not. I am not, I'm just happy to be friendly. So, I think with that said, if Rod is ready to go, I will introduce the crap out of him. Rod Van Meter is one of our previous speakers. He has been with us before and showed us a shockingly good, well-shot video about surfing, or rather with a surfboard, which shocked every last one of us. He has spent 1/3 of his life to date in West Virginia, 1/3 in Cali, and 1/3 in Japan. Each third is 17 years. You can do the math. He has degrees from Caltech in the Reagan area. In the Reagan era. There was a Reagan area of Caltech. I'm not going to talk about it. It's very touchy-feely. University of Southern California in the H.W. Bush era, and Keio University in the W era. Why did you write George W. Bush on this? Why could you say W would have been fine? He is currently an associate professor in the Faculty of Environment and Information Studies at Keio University's Shonan Fujisawa campus. Hey, I forgot, you're really close to me. He wishes he had more time for movies, hiking, and surfing. He still manages to do at least one of those every now and then. You can find him on Twitter at @RGV123. It's actually just 3 eyes. I'm not sure what he's doing there, really. But you can catch him on Twitter there. And Rod, I believe it is time, ladies and gentlemen, Rod Van Meter!
Thank you. All right, so I'm going to give you all a talk this evening involving lots and lots of equations. So everybody's all ready for this, right? Yes. All right. Well, no, not really. I promised Amanda I wouldn't use any equations tonight. Actually, we've had some talks on quantum computing here at Nerd Night in the past, and I'm actually really not going to go into the technical details of this at any level. What I really want to talk about tonight is sort of the social aspects of what's going on with quantum computing. I hope you'll see what we're talking about here. So first, I assume most of you are familiar with the term digital native, right? Does anybody here actually claim to be a digital native? Anybody under the age of about 35 is probably a reasonable candidate for a digital native, right? There are people who are raised with digital devices. I can tell you my own daughters think differently than I do and process information and find information differently than I do. So digital natives are people who are brought up with digital technology, right? Well, what if we replace this digital with quantum? You're all hearing, every week there's some news item about what's going on in the quantum computing world. IBM's doing this, somebody's doing a startup, Google is doing that, somebody's doing a startup, Microsoft is doing that, some government is doing that. It's all over the place, right? So we're now reaching the point where we can talk about people who are quantum natives. So these are people whose first experience with learning about computing is through the lens of quantum computing. So one of the problems that we have, most of the older people, so I don't know if you all did the math when John was talking, but 3 times 17 is 51, right? So I'm 51 years old. There weren't a lot of quantum computers when I was 15 or 20 years old, right? So I'm not a quantum native. But the students that I'm teaching today at the university, some of them are literally freshmen, and some of them have never worked with algorithms and computers before, so they are quantum natives. Their first experience in learning about computing machines is actually in this context. So we're going to talk about that, but I actually want to talk more about a different aspect of the overall social ecosystem that's sort of evolving here, and talk about teaching this stuff online. This is what a university used to look like, right? This is 1898. This picture came from Wikipedia. This is what a university looks like today. This is our own campus. Right? Maybe not so different, right? People have laptops now instead of notebooks. There's a screen instead of some other stuff. And the gender balance has gotten a little bit better than it was in this particular photo, but maybe not as much as we would like, at least in some areas. All right, but these days, more and more people are actually doing a lot of their learning online, and part of what we're trying to do is we're actually trying to change the way people work and learn. A MOOC. Who knows what a MOOC is? Everybody here know what a MOOC is? All right. What's a MOOC? Oh, he tells me he knows. He's got his hand waving up here, and he doesn't have the foggiest what it is. Who knows what a MOOC is? Right? What's a MOOC?
Massive online
Massive online something, all right? That would be MOS instead of MOOC. But massive online open course, or massive open online course is what we're in. There are a bunch of different companies. You're probably familiar with some of them. edX, Coursera are two of the big ones. FutureLearn is another one of the big ones. They came out of UK. They came out of what's called the Open University in the UK. And they're the organization that KO has chosen to work with on this. Okay. Part of what they're trying to do is actually change the way that you learn. So the learning design at FutureLearn, they present you with three sort of taglines or three sort of themes for doing this. They tell you that what you should be doing is storytelling, provoking conversations, and celebrating progress. And I'll tell you, so that works reasonably well when you're doing something like history for an online course. But I still haven't really entirely figured out how you deal with provoking conversations about quantum computing. So how does Shor's algorithm for factoring make you feel? Does it make you nervous? Right? I mean, what kind of conversations are we actually going to have about quantum computing? But that's the general idea here. The other approach they sort of take to dealing with this is they talk about social learning, big questions, and particularly small steps. Okay? Different types of materials online. There are articles, videos and audio, items online. There are discussion boards, there are quizzes, there are tests, there are exercises. We added in some 3D printable materials and some other sorts of things, so I want to show you some of those real quick. KO has put together several different courses. Mine is the fourth one that's going on. The first couple were on things like rare books in Japan. All right, you want me to stand over here? I'd rather stand over there. Yes. John wants me to stand where I can see the camera. Right? Take your pick. All right. So we did this course, which we called Understanding Quantum Computers. And I came here last July, give or take, and showed you all the trailer video for this just to sort of get people interested and excited. And for some reason or another, it generated a tremendous round of applause when my butt came up in the video. So I thought I would try that again and see if I get a big cheer out of this. Woo! Yeah! This is what John was referring to in the intro, whether you knew that or not. So there are a whole bunch of videos and different sorts of things that you can get online and look at. Those are some clips from different ones. But what really makes this unique is not sitting and watching an hour-long lecture, which you might as well, have gotten a VHS videotape out of the library or something, or a book. A lot of what we're doing is what makes things is the interactivity. And so I actually had students who created a series of JavaScript applets for what we were doing. And so, for example, this one shows how interference works between two different kinds of waves, or waves at two different frequencies. You're generating two waves here at the bottom, and then you sum them up here at the top, and it shows you sort of what happens. If you learn how interference works, then you're learning a lot about how quantum algorithms actually work. So this is one of the tools that we created. There's a quiz that follows on from this. Another one of the tools that we created shows you what interference is actually like in 2 dimensions. And this was created again by one of my students. This was actually created by a freshman who's actually put in this. So we have students as young as 18 coming in and actually working with us and actually building the tools that we're using in doing these sorts of things. They come and join our research group in the process. This one was created to demonstrate the beautiful concept of modular exponentiation, which is one that you have to know for understanding how a particular quantum algorithm works. And there are these beautiful patterns, and we had people on the discussion boards. I was wondering what would happen with discussion of quantum computing. People came and they said, hey, if you put in these numbers, you get this really cool pattern out of this. Here's another set that gives you a really cool pattern. So people played with this online and actually learned about a tremendous amount about it and enjoyed it a great deal. One more final one, we did one on a classical algorithm known as Euclid's algorithm that shows you actually how to calculate the greatest common divisor between of a couple of numbers. So these are the kinds of things that you can do interactively and online that are difficult to do with either a book or a videotape. So in theory, this is all sort of starting to work better. We also put together, I've forgotten what the name for this particular application is, but it's a discussion board where people could post videos and photos and things of that nature, and we asked them to go out and find examples of this kind of interference out in the real world. And they did a tremendous job. People went out and found dogs standing in a puddle and showing, and the reflection of the light on the waves showed interference patterns, and moire patterns from a garbage can. Somebody had video of a moire pattern of a garbage can. So just some beautiful and fascinating and unexpected stuff. So, was this a success? FutureLearn's biggest courses, you might run into the hundreds of thousands, but you wouldn't expect that you would get 100,000 people working on quantum computing, at least not yet, right? So where were we? We had 2,555 people sign up for this, of whom 303 completed 90% or more of the overall course. So by MOOC standards, that's actually considered pretty good to have 15% or so of your learners actually come in and learn that well. They came from 127 different countries and regions. So this is not, that's beyond the kind of reach that I could normally have with just lecturing at a single university. We have people from countries that have large universities with very active quantum research programs, and maybe some of those people will go on to study at those universities, but we also have a lot of learners who came from countries and regions where there is not yet an active group of quantum researchers. Maybe some of them will continue to learn online from their home countries. Maybe some of them will come and work with us here at the university in Japan. We'll see. Don't believe this data. So this data is the age data, but we only actually have self-reported ages from less than 10%. So don't believe the ratio. But in particular, one of the things I thought was interesting, we had a significant number of people who were under the age of 18 who were talking about, who joined the course and did this. And those were the people I was actually targeting with this. I really wanted to get 16 to 20-year-olds, high school students and young college students, people who might come and actually start to study this for their career. It was one of the groups of people I wanted to attract. But we had people as old as 88 years old in this. That's the oldest that I know of. Again, this is self-reported, but so I don't know. There might have been somebody in their 90s or early 100s who was actually involved in taking the course, but they didn't tell us. They didn't fill in the form for that. So I know what you all are thinking. Hey, this is great. How much work is it? It's a lot of work. We started this. It took us a year to implement this whole thing from the time we started planning. Some of you are also researchers or professors in universities, so you sort of know that your time is divided up into a bunch of different chunks. You got your teaching, and you got your research, and you got your university, whatnot. This consumed all of my research time and all of my spare time from February until October. All right. I got basically no other free time for doing anything that I wanted. It was a tremendous amount of fun. We worked with a great team in doing all of this, and I really highly recommend it. Know that it's a big commitment. Right? And now, at the end, actually one of the things I'm really sort of interested in, if anybody is really interested in digital society and digital tools and those sorts of things, one of the problems we would really like to solve is how you can do this much more scalably, rather than having to invest hundreds of hours in creating something like this. And of course, I worked with a great team, so there's a photo of my great team. We don't have, we were unfortunately never all in the same place at one time, so I never got a group photo of everybody. It was me, a couple of PhD students, a master's student, a professor who actually specializes on online education, some professional staff we have, and about a half a dozen of my undergrads actually contributed to this process, including 2 who were actually freshmen at the time. So, a lot of fun. So, you're thinking, all right, I can go and I can learn about this, but what about actually doing this? I mean, quantum computing is not really happening yet. I can't go buy a quantum computer over at Yodobashi Camera in Akihabara, right? Can I get involved and can I do it? Well, KO joined up with IBM. This was an announcement that was made just last month to join their network and allow our students and company members to come to KO and actually begin working on quantum computing. Some of this is available for free, even if you're not a member of this, and some of it's only available to people who pay to companies that pay the enormous membership fees. But this is what IBM's quantum computing chip looks like. This is what the machine looks like. And this is what the laboratory looks like. And that's not something that we all have sort of sitting around, right? Now's a great time to get involved. But you can go and sign up and you'll get access to a system like this in the process. These are projects that were done by a student of mine who was actually a freshman at the time. And he proved that the IBM quantum computer actually works. He went and demonstrated that there are quantum things going on inside this thing. Assuming we trust that IBM was really running this on their machine in the New York laboratory rather than just feeding us junk data across the web, right? But assuming it was really happening, then yeah, we got to see how the machine actually works. So you saw that GUI that allows you to sort of play with these sorts of things, which is great. It's a great place to start, but if you want to do more advanced sorts of things, then you want something that's actually more like a programming language like this. In fact, those sorts of tools are available as well. And you get data out of it that looks something like this in the process. There is a second system that's actually produced here in Japan. It's a very different kind of quantum computer that was created by a team from Stanford and Riken and NTT and a couple of other places. And they put a system online that allows people to actually go and experiment with it. And again, work done by one of my freshmen. He's using an optical type of quantum computer at NTT's laboratories down in Atsugi, available via the web, and anybody can sign up and use that. So who are these quantum natives? Right? Well, let's see. This guy in the middle of the box is one of my collaborators. He's an electrical engineer. He's not a quantum native. Upper left, that guy's a physicist. I don't know, would you call a physicist quantum native or not? This guy's, he hasn't really ever studied algorithms classically, so I don't know, is it fair to give him the tag quantum native or not? I don't know. Guy in the lower right, also a physicist. But these two other guys, these were my first two students when I joined KO as a faculty member back in 2007, and they are both definitely quantum native. They stuck their hand up the first week that I was at SFC and said, I want to study quantum computing. And they had no prior experience with computing, so they've been doing this now for over 10 years. Similarly, like I said, this guy is definitely not quantum native, right? I'm way too old for that. This guy over here is internet native. He's the professor who brought the internet to Japan back in the 1980s. But the rest of them, I think you can say, are quantum native. Some of them are as young as 18. Some of them are a little older than that. And they're getting this kind of experience. To them, everybody complains that understanding quantum mechanics is hard, it's confusing, it's weird, quantum computers are unintelligible. They're not going to think that. They're going to think that classical computers are much too limited, is the opinion that they're going to carry on out. Sadly, right, I'm a digital immigrant, right, because I'm an old guy. I didn't get my first computer until I was 13 years old, right? Everybody in this room, unless you haven't actually studied classical computers before, we're all going to be quantum immigrants. Right? The young guys, they're going to be quantum natives, but we're going to be quantum immigrants. You can sort of think of that as kind of sad if you want. Nevertheless, you can do this. You can get involved and do it yourself. All of the tools from IBM and from NTT, they're available online. The MOOC, we did the first run of this in October, and I didn't put up a slide in here showing the planned schedule, but we're planning on doing the second run of it in May. So for those of you who are interested in the concept, in May we'll actually be running it again online, and you can sign up and take the MOOC for free in the process. And the final thing I really want to say is, with this kind of MOOC that involves both video and text and these online applications and 3D printable objects and online quizzes and things like that, we're finally getting to the point where this promise of online computing is really sort of starting to happen. That's the 3 bullet points I want you to take home out of this. And with that, finally, I will be chairing a conference here in Japan next year on quantum networks. If any of you are interested, please let me know. We're looking for both sponsors and participants. And if you're interested in quantum networking, you can check out my ridiculously overpriced book on the topic. And with that, thank you all.
Yes. We are exactly on time. Thank
How about
you,
that?
Rod. Are there questions for Rod?
I hope so. I hope so.
Jens.
Hi, thanks. I hope this doesn't sound argumentative. I'm actually kind of curious about this, but I mean, I have 2 daughters who are also would be considered, I guess, quantum natives.
That's neat.
But I'm sort of wondering, are they actually taught quantum? Because, like, you know how the micro world might behave that way, but the macro world sort of behaves classically. And I wonder if they're actually getting education which is different than the education that I got. I mean, are they taught quantum mechanics?
That's, so, boy, we can talk about that one all night. You know, I take in, at our campus, one of the things that's unique about the Shonan Fujisawa campus is that students come and join our research groups, usually as sophomores, sometimes as freshmen. So they come join my group. We start by handing them a quantum mechanics book, here. Handing them a linear algebra book, here. Probability, here. So the majority of the students who have been through my group in the last 10 years are not doing quantum computing for a living. Most of them are classical programmers. They work for DNA and, you know, the game company and Works applications and for Cisco and for other people. But what they're learning probability and linear algebra and things in the process. And so I believe that the education they're getting is valuable even if they don't stick with the quantum stuff. But years from now, they're going to be the ones who are in the position inside of their companies to say, yeah, this is where we ought to be going with quantum computing. And, you know, the students who really absorb it deeply are going to be seeing, yeah, I need to go solve this problem, and I can solve it either using a quantum computer or a classical computer. And man, that classical computer is just so limiting. I wish I could do it with the quantum computer instead. How old are your daughters?
24 and 22.
Send them to me. We'll turn them. We'll put them to work in my lab, and they'll be quantum natives in no time at all.
Send them to Rod's quantum sweatshop. Anybody over here?
Come on, put them hands up.
I seriously didn't listen your presentation, just arrived here. So
That's okay. John's got it streamed online.
Yeah, I'm very interested in quantum computing.
Good.
And my question is kind of about Bitcoin. No, it's very kind of enough. So
The question is what?
About Bitcoin.
Bitcoin.
So actually, Bitcoin is built based on the traditional computing systems. So my question is, if the quantum computing will be a threat to Bitcoin, because if in the future, if we use the quantum computing to Bitcoin mining, if it used in the Bitcoin mining, if it will be a big threat to the Bitcoin, I don't know. It's just
There have been a couple of research papers that have been published in just the last couple of years on whether or not quantum computers can either be used to do Bitcoin mining more rapidly, or if they're a threat to undermining the actual system that Bitcoin is built on top of. And I think the preliminary conclusion is, yes, there's going to be some impact there, but I don't think anybody really understands yet how big and how fast and how powerful a quantum computer is going to take in order to do that kind, in order to influence that kind of system. It's still a long ways in the future. There's no doubt about that. But it's actually an interesting question. it's one of those things I've been wanting to invest some time in doing research on myself, and I haven't gotten around to it. So if you have ideas, I'm open to hearing them.
I don't know much about it. And second question is, so what's the, like, I read some news about quantum computing, like, forget my question, sorry.
That's all right, come find me again after.
It's about, what's the, so I read the news about actually the quantum computing can be used in the normal, like we use browsing the website. Actually, it won't make it faster because it's just can be used in some special occasions. It will make you like work faster and blah blah.
For the foreseeable future, quantum computers are going to be used for a very specialized set of applications. They're not going to displace the Macintosh that's being used to run this, or whatever's being used to control these lights or anything. They'll be used for cryptographic functions. For one of the big areas is actually computation on quantum chemistry, which allows us to design new medicines and new materials and solve important problems with things like agricultural fertilizers and things like that. And then the third big area where they will be contributing is optimization problems. And that's one of the areas where people are actually investing a lot of time and energy these days, is trying to figure out how to use the existing small quantum computers to help us solve particular optimization problems. So those classes of problems they'll be attacking, but you're not going to be running Minesweeper on your quantum computer anytime soon.
Okay. So actually, last question is, sorry, what's the biggest handicap for the development of the quantum computing, and when it will be commercialized?
Well, IBM's trying really hard to commercialize it right now, right? They're trying to turn this into a business that will make them millions of dollars and will sustain their continuing effort for doing this. The biggest technologies, there are a bunch of different, or the biggest technical hurdles, there are a bunch of different technologies people are working on. There's superconducting, quantum dots, photonic systems, ones using specialized types of diamonds, and the problems with each of those are sort of different, but the one thing they all have in common is the difficulty of scaling up the control system for building large-scale systems. And that's an area where classical computer people can potentially have a very big impact, I think.
Okay, thank you.
So I'm not very up to date with quantum computing, so I don't know what.
Neither am I, and I work on it full time.
But I just wanted to ask, so what is the coolest thing that they are already able to do? Like something that is understandable to a normal person? Like what kind of problem they can already solve? Well, my understanding is that the problem is there are no algorithms for quantum computing yet, right? But
there are several hundred. The problem is whether or not they can be run on the existing machines. The largest machines that have been announced so far, IBM has one that has 50 qubits in it, and Intel just announced one that's in the same size, and Google has promised us one that will be in the same size range, and Microsoft is building their own. But really what they're trying, where everybody is going right now is they're trying to find what are called hybrid algorithms, where you use a small and noisy quantum computer in conjunction with a large classical computer, and cooperatively they solve a problem. So the kinds of people, there are people who have actually demonstrated algorithms for things like quantum chemistry. So for quantum chemistry, one of the things you're wanting to do is you're wanting to understand, for example, the amount of energy that's in a particular molecular configuration. So finding that kind of the ground state energy of a particular molecule. They have run really small examples of those sorts of things on the existing quantum computers. So I would say that's one of the interesting things people have done. One of the others is that they're trying to actually use quantum computers to behave like other quantum systems. So you can take an electrical circuit that consists of resistors and capacitors and inductors, and make that oscillate in a way that's analogous to the same way that a bridge or these lights or something vibrates. So that same kind of analogy, they're doing that today with existing quantum computers. They're saying, look, we can set this thing up so that the quantum system behaves like another quantum system, and then we can learn about how that quantum system would behave. And that's the kind of thing that people are trying to do in the short run. And they've got some successes, nothing yet that we can say quantum computers are better than classical computers. But I would bet that this year, 2018, someone will claim that I solved this problem on a quantum computer and no classical computer can solve it. They will claim that sometime this year.
Will they be right?
There will be a big argument about that, and we're actually in the process of writing a paper about that.
Actually, my question is similar with that lady, that when you think that we need to give up the classical computer?
Never.
What does it mean by never? Because we know that quantum computer...
Well, not as long as the human race is around.
Okay.
So once the AIs have replaced us, they can decide whether or not they want to keep quantum AIs around or not, right?
So like in the next 50 years. Okay. Maybe like one more question? Yeah.
I'm a very classic guy.
Good.
So my question is about startup. I'm trying to imagine the quantum computer. So there's not going to be some laptop computer that we usually have when we're talking about quantum computer. It's more like a cloud infrastructure that built a big machine by Microsoft or by IBM, and we just use a classic computer to access the computing power.
In the short run, it's going to be through a web-based front end, at least for a lot of people. So when KO announced this deal with IBM, I was involved in the negotiations going back a few months. I said, I'd love it if you would bring one of your quantum computers and put them on our campus. Everybody laughs when you do that because they are still so hard to set up and control to build. Let's see, where did I put the clicker? Lost my clickiness. Hang on. Yeah. There we go. I've lost my clickiness. So this is the chip, and it's the same size as a standard classical chip, give or take. The machine looks something like this. So these two people are working on this. This is your quantum computer. This whole thing gets put inside a giant refrigerator and sealed system for this. And it takes a laboratory this size to set all this up and run it. So you can't today pick it up and move it to Japan very easily. There are similar laboratories at our Yagami campus and at Todai and at NTT and other places, of course, for their own sorts of things. So you're not going to have a portable one for the foreseeable future, but we would love to get there, right? There are a lot of patents and a lot of money to be made in the process, I'm sure.
So it's like a cloud computer that you need if you need more power, you need to pay more money, kind of.
Hopefully, yeah.
Business model.
Yeah, in the short run, yeah. And a lot of my work is actually on designing a quantum internet to help us connect multiple ones together and access it over a quantum internet as opposed to over the classical internet. That's another whole different talk.
I see. Sorry, my last question, I promise. So when we're talking about supercomputer, there's a supercomputer already, and we have cloud computing, like
right.
AWS. And compared to them, how much powerful is quantum computing we're talking about?
There's not an easy answer to that. It's the question everybody wants a simple answer to, and there isn't one. It's an hour-long discussion for what does it mean to be faster, because it depends on the problem you're talking about, the size of problem, and in particular, as the problem gets bigger, how much slower does your computer get? And with quantum computers, that's supposed to be the win. As the problem gets bigger, it gets slower, but not slower as fast as a classical computer gets. It's solving a problem of the same size. So where are we with that? Long discussion, but this next couple of years is going to be really interesting. Thank you.
And that's a wrap. Let's thank Rod.
Thank you all.
And I think you can probably come up and ask questions if you didn't get answered. But we have a 20-minute break now. so go pee, get a drink, come back, mingle. We'll see you in 20.
All right, well, Amanda's going to get a baseball bat with the rules of our question system. Would the person who wrote me that iPhone with the charger brick also with power plug with it? Thanks. See you guys in 20 minutes. issue with me not talking is that I can't actually put this awesome sound effect on the board, and I'm hoping it'll work. All right, welcome back. For those of you who are old like me, you know that movie. Protagonist is awesome. So, where are we? What are we even doing right now?
Enunciating.
Is it you, Andrew? Oh, shut the hell up, I'm on TV. What are we talking about? Oh, Tokyo Fugue! Oh my god! So, if you may recall, those of you who were at Nerd Night last time, this awesome pair called Ken and Tanya did this really cool thing called Corporeal Mind. They taught you how to isolate the movements of your body based on what you're doing. It makes you look really cool or weird, depending on who you ask. And Andrew, speaking of weird, depending on who you ask, would like to tell you about what Ken and Tanya are up to on the 20th.
In case your eyes don't work and you can't read. So, as you guys may know, we did a show in Kawasaki back in December. They are getting a repeat of their show at a school in Yokohama. It is open to the public. It's on Saturday, the 20th, at, I'm just reading this off the card, this is so terrible, at 7 o'clock. If you're interested, go to, no QR code, guys? Go to their Facebook page, go to this, or talk to me at the end. I can give you the information in case you don't have time to type this in because they didn't put a QR code on the screen. It's actually really cheap. It's only 1,500 yen. The show's only about an hour. It's fucking amazing. You should go see it. And it's your last chance because I think the next time they're going to be doing the show will be with me, hopefully in the summer in Malaysia. So unless you have an airplane ticket to
Malaysia, really?
Well, I don't know yet. It's in process.
Keep me informed on that. That's cool. We do the thing. Theater thing.
Okay.
Next. All right, so I'm running a flea market the day after that, on the 21st. Please don't, oh my God. As I'm talking to nerds, I have to say this. Don't bring fleas. Jesus. Flea market, we're selling a bunch of stuff. We're cleaning up the theater, selling some electronics, like some old laptops. Like sound stuff, wires, cables, toys. There's a whole list. And
do we have the reel-to-reel still? Is that gone?
The reel-to-reel is still there. Pricing is a diffiety with the reel-to-reel because it is actually a very expensive one.
Audio nerds.
But there's sealed reel-to-reel tape if you're looking for that from way back when. Because they don't make that shit anymore. There's a QR code if you're interested in going, or you can talk to me. And I'll tell you where it is. It's a lot of fun, 11 to 5, and there's going to be popcorn and stuff, and we're going to have food, probably free, and it's going to maybe some balloons for kids. I don't know. Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. That's it for me.
Yes, and I'll be there. So, like, extra, not fun. Reel to reel. All right, next thing, we have another speaker coming up. Before that, I have 0 announcements, but a question. Actually, I wanted to ask something really fast. How many of you actually know how to read a QR code? This is purely a marketing question. How many of you know how to read a QR code and do on the /regular basis? Okay, so we're not wasting our time. Thank you for your answer. I've been looking for reasons to criticize Andrew for years and years and years, and no one ever gives me one.
QR codes rock.
All right. Y'all settle down, please. QR codes are a very highly discussed subject. I'm sure they are. But Morgan is ready to talk.
How many can read it without a device?
Actually, I don't know. I'd love to. Morgan. Is it Morgane or Morgan?
Depends if you speak in
French or English. Well, seeing as how I'm an incompetent American in language, I will say Morgan for the time being. Morgan is a chemist by training. After bobbing around at placements in Italy, Canada, and Singapore, such fine places of things and stuff, she finally found her love for molecular neuroscience during a sabbatical in Germany, auf Deutschland, in 2009. After that, she picked up a PhD in neuroscience in Bordeaux, as you just do, pick them up off the street. And she is now a postdoc fellow at the Riken Brain Science Institute. Scientifically, as opposed to not, her work ranges from chemical biology to cellular neuroscience to learning and memory. But the common thread in her projects running through is taking pretty pictures. I did not know this about you. And tonight she's going to show some of these pictures and tell us how glowing proteins have revolutionized the study of brain cells. Ladies and gentlemen, Morgane Rosendale.
Thanks very much, John. Good evening, everyone. So, as you just mentioned, my name is Morgane. I'm working at the Riken in Japan. And I was going
be more precise, I'm working with neurobiologists so that they can understand the brain at a very tiny scale by providing them with new molecules. And the molecules I'm mostly interested in are molecules that emit light. Of course, in this picture, the colors are for artistic purposes. It's just some fluorescent wiggles that look pretty. But what if I told you that we could see, how nice would it be if we could see that many colors in the brain? Now again, this is a more scientific picture, but the colors are just a rendering. The fibers, the bundles, have been determined for a scientific question, but the colors were added post-processing so that we can see what's going on. Now what if I told you that this picture is a natural brain? Not a human brain, but a slice of a mouse brain. And to make things a little bit more clear, I'm actually saying that every single dot you see here and their connected wire are single neurons, single cells. And they are literally glowing with light. So I hope that you find this as pretty as I do, because tonight I'm going to tell you how we can get those images and how they are important in neuroscience. So our story starts with this little jellyfish, Aquaria Victoria, which swims in the waters of the Pacific Ocean. And back in the 60s, this Japanese scientist, Dr. Shimomura, was studying this jellyfish. And by studying, I mean that he was crushing a lot of them until he obtained this liquid known by the sweet name squeezate. Now, as the story goes, he was doing this with his family and they just squeezed like millions of jellyfish. But why would they do that? They did that because this squeezate, under normal conditions, it looked kind of yellow. But if he shined blue light on it, it started glowing green. So he was interested in why and where this green light came from. So he purified the squeezate and found that it came from a protein, and he named that protein the green fluorescent protein. Easy enough. So the name's easy, but you may be wondering why I'm showing this picture when I'm talking about a protein. We all know that those are the real proteins, right? But I trust the nerd in you to remember your high school classes. In every cell of our body, we have chromosomes. And those chromosomes are made of very tightly bundled DNA. And this DNA is a code, shared by all living organisms on Earth, made of A's, C's, G's, and T's. This code can be transcribed into RNA and then read by something known as ribosomes. Those ribosomes will associate every 3 letter of the DNA code to an amino acid, and then put the amino acid together into a chain that is a protein. That's why we say that proteins are coded by DNA. Now, as the amino acids are being put together and the chain elongates, the protein starts to bend and acquire some shape. They make helices and strands, and those are the proteins that you are familiar with. So muscle cells are full of proteins, but there are other words that you probably know, but don't know that they are proteins. Enzymes are proteins. Antibodies in your immune system are proteins. And as I was just saying, the green fluorescent protein is a protein. So what I just told you is that the green fluorescent protein is coded by DNA. And DNA is shared by all organisms, so why does only the jellyfish glow green? Well, that's the whole point of evolution, providing a property to an organism that requires it. Actually, nature has started with a very simple DNA template, but this template, with time, has mutated because of replication errors, because of DNA damage, whatever the reason, there were some mutations. And more often than not, these mutations could not code for a proper protein. The protein had no function, so the organism got sick or died. But sometimes, just sometimes, the mutation could code for a viable protein. But because the DNA was different, the protein was different, so it had acquired a new property. And if this was good for the organism, then it would be transferred by reproduction to the next generation, and a new species would be born. So why couldn't we confer this property of glowing green to some organisms that we're interested in studying, so we can see inside those organisms? We could copy evolution and make our own green fluorescent protein mutants. Now I'm pretty sure that if I use those 3 words in the same sentence, a green fluorescent protein mutant, you'd probably think of that kind of thing. But actually, that man had another idea. His idea of a genetically modified organism expressing the green fluorescent protein was that of a worm. Here, in green, you see the sensory neurons of the worm, where normally you would just see, this brown wiggle in the garden. And since then, many animals have been modified, and we can now study their organs inside animals, like the spinal cord of a fish, the eyes of a fly, the muscles of a frog, the skin of a mouse, but also more specifically in some certain types of cells, like cancerous cells, and you can follow the progression of the disease. But these are not really green fluorescent protein mutants. They are animal mutants who modified the genome of the animal to express the green fluorescent protein and gain that property. But what if we mutated the DNA that codes for the protein itself? What properties can a protein gain? That was the work of this man, Roger Tien. By the end of his life, he had mutated the green fluorescent protein so many times he exactly knew which kind of property he could gain by which mutation. But at the beginning, back in the 90s, it was all kind of random. The first property he managed to tweak out of the GFP was to increase its brightness, so it was now easier to see. Then came a whole bunch of technical mutations. For example, it could mature at 37 degrees, so it could now be used in mammals. It was more soluble, more stable. I wouldn't be telling you this if that was all the story. The real stuff came when he managed to change his color. And actually, that was so cool and so interesting for the scientific community that those three guys got the Nobel Prize in chemistry in 2008. However much they played with this little jellyfish, they could only go from blue to yellow light emission. It would be interesting to have more colors so that we could see more and more things in a single example. And lucky for us, the ocean is full of colors. So the story continues with this discosomal coral, which shines red thanks to a protein today known as DS-Red. Unfortunately, DS-Red is very big. It's 4 times bigger than the green fluorescent protein, so it's a hassle to work with. So first scientists had to mutate it so that it would become way smaller, so they finally obtained a red fluorescent protein, and they mutated it further to gain more colors, and they actually ended up having the whole range of the rainbow. And because scientists are fun, they named them nuts and fruits, and we still do as new proteins are being discovered. Now, this is very nice, it's very pretty, but how does that help us understanding the neural code? Well, you remember that picture from the beginning? We call this brain the brainbow. In this case, the fluorescent proteins are expressed exclusively in the neurons of the mouse, but we don't have that many colors. As I showed you, we maybe have like 10 or 15 different colors. The trick here is to express random ratios of green, blue, and red fluorescent proteins, and these combinations of random ratios will give over 100 hues, as you can see there. And the interest of that is that you can now follow every neuron and study its morphology, and you can do that over thousands of neurons. And studying its morphology means that you know where it starts and where it ends, in which brain area its main body is, to which brain area it's sending information, and this is known as connectivity. And connectivity in the brain means the computational power of the brain, just like the wires of an electrical circuit. But it's not all about neurons in the brain. We have other cell types. In this more zoomed image, the scientists have stained the neurons in blue, but in green you see oligodendrocytes that wrap around neurons to insulate them so that the electrical impulses will go faster. And in red you see astrocytes, which feed and help neurons in their function. So you can actually study the interaction of different cell types in the brain by being able to distinguish them thanks to colors. Another cool thing you can do with fluorescent proteins is make them sensitive to some chemicals. In this case, the green fluorescent protein is brighter in the presence of calcium. And in the brain, calcium is really important because every electrical signal is accompanied by an increase in calcium concentration. So in this example, you're seeing the cortex of a mouse running in a virtual maze with a mini microscope on its head. And every flash of green light you see is neuronal communication. You're seeing with your bare eyes neurons sending information to each other. And these patterns of activation are thought to be the basis of some forms of cognition, like navigation or decision making. So I've shown you how we can understand the circuit level, or how we can study the cellular level with these fluorescent proteins. Now let me take you down to the molecular level. I told you that enzymes, for example, are proteins, and that the GFP is a protein. That means that both of them are coded by DNA. Now what would happen if we could link more A's, C's, G's, and T's to make a single strand of DNA. In this case, we would create a single strand of amino acids, meaning a single protein. This is known as a fusion protein. It is now an enzyme with all the properties of the enzyme, but it now glows green so you can see it. That's how you obtain those kind of images where you have several colors in the same cell. The red is non-fused red fluorescent protein like you're used to seeing, but the blue is fused to a nuclear protein, so it only localizes where the original protein was, so it's only blue in the nucleus. And the green was fused to a synaptic protein, meaning that it now shines green only in synapses. All those dots are synapses, and synapses are really important because they are the exact contact points between two neurons. This is where the communication takes place. And there's a lot of computation, chemical computation, happening in those green dots. It's not all zeros and ones in the brain. There's a lot of filtering happening in there. Now, as I said, we can make them sensitive to some chemicals. This is some data that I acquired myself during my PhD, where I fused a protein that is normally at the surface of the cell to a fluorescent protein that is sensitive to acidity. And in cells, the acidity outside of the cell and inside of the cell is different. So every time that a cell takes up some nutrients, it has to form a small vesicle to get inside. And in this case, the acidity will change inside the vesicle because it used to be outside, which is different. So in this film, which is not playing anymore, every flash of green light is actually the formation. This way? Yeah. Yeah. Every flash of green light means that one of those vesicles has closed. And in neurons, the place where those vesicles close and open is one of the many mechanisms through which we form and maintain memories. Now, I'm going to show you one last example of what we can do with fluorescent proteins. There are many more, but I picked this one because it was discovered in the 90s by my current PI. So it's very related to what I'm doing today. The question was, what would happen if you would fuse two fluorescent proteins to a single protein? In this configuration, not much. The whole thing would just glow yellow because it emits both green and red. But some proteins, to exert their action, have to change shape. And in this case, if you place the fluorescent proteins in YZ, they may get close to each other when they used to be far before the protein activated, before it changed shape. And this is when something really amazing happens. There will be a transfer of energy from the green protein to the red protein. That means that the green protein will get dimmer, and the red protein will get brighter. It means that now you can not only see where a protein is, you can also know what it's doing, when it's being active. Let's say, for example, you want to study proteins A and B. You know that they're very similar, you know that they express everywhere in the neuron, but you want to know their activity. Using this technology, by fusing two fluorescent proteins to each of them, you can answer that question. You can see that their patterns of activation, the place where they get red, is different. When this synapse is receiving information, protein A only activates in the synapse that had received the information. On the opposite, when this synapse receives information, protein B activates everywhere. The whole branch gets redder. Now you may think this is not so much, but to your brain this is really important. To make a very long story extremely short and incomplete, and I apologize for this, one of the reasons your memories are very specific, like you would not mistake your mother for your father, is because this protein A, named Rho, stays confined to the synapse that received the information you're looking for, your mother. But the reason that your memories can associate, if you think of your mother, you can think about her age, her favorite color, her name, favorite food, anything, is because this protein B, named RAP, can spread the information to the rest of the neuron and to the neighboring synapse that then know other information. So I hope that I convinced you that by using colors, by using fluorescent proteins coming originally from a jellyfish or some corals, we can understand the brain better. But if you will bear with me for a few more minutes, I would like to introduce another technology that nature has given us, a little bit different, but maybe some people heard of it. So far, I told you about some proteins that would send some chemicals to emit light. What if we could have the opposite? What if we could have a protein that senses light to create a chemical reaction? If you think about it, this is what happens in your eye. Your eye senses light and sends information to your brain. But of course, the human eye is very complex, meaning the chemical reactions happening when the eye is sensing light is very complex. But any complex machinery comes from a very simple one originally. So if you go down in the evolution, you can find some light-sensitive proteins in algae. The whole point for them is just to move towards or away from light so they can optimize their photosynthesis. But in this case, the light-sensitive protein has a very simple reaction. They move charges from the outside to the inside of the cell. And a movement of charges is an electrical current. In the case of the algae, it's just used so that the equivalent of muscle cells will take them towards the light. But in neurons, we know that electrical currents mean communication, and neuronal communication is cognition and behavior. So what would happen if we would take a light-sensitive protein from the algae, but now using its DNA, express it in a neuron? This will be the last example of my presentation. I introduce you this little mouse. The first thing I'm going to say is that it's not painful for the mouse. It's been modified so that the neurons of its cortex can now sense light. They express the light-sensitive protein of the algae, and it's connected to an optical fiber on its head. So you can shine light on demand on its brain. Now, originally, this mouse has been placed into a new environment, this nice white box, and it's exploring it by sniffing. Then at some point, the light turns on. I hope you can see the blue dot. And it starts running in circles, and it cannot stop. It just keeps going. And that is because its motor neurons are activated, stimulated by the light. Then the light stops, and everything goes back to normal, and the mouse is just exploring quietly. Now, what happened here is that the light stimulated the light-sensitive protein, which activated the neurons, which sends the information to the muscles, and the mouse started running. So using light, we're totally controlling the behavior of this mouse. So I hope you can imagine that with much more subtle stimulations, we can, instead of shining light onto a whole brain area, we could stimulate maybe a few neurons, or a single neuron, or maybe a single synapse, and understand much more about the brain. So I hope I convinced you that adding colors to the brain is a very nice way of doing science. And I will conclude with a quote from this man, who is kind of my scientific grandfather because he was my PI's PI. And he said, "Long may the jellyfish and corals have intact habitats in which to shine." So I hope that we take care of nature, because it's always fueling scientists from all disciplines with new ideas. So I fully agree with this statement, and I thank you for your attention.
Sweet, live long and prosper, jellyfish. Who has a question? Anybody interested in rainbows back here? Please pass the mic down.
Hi, thank you so much. Absolutely fantastic presentation. It was extremely interesting. Just looking at that last video of the mouse running around with the light line, do you think there's applications for that for people saying, wait, that wasn't a joke. People like motor neural diseases or with, to be able to stimulate a muscle that otherwise there's some difficulty stimulating, is that an area of study that's happening right now?
So it absolutely is. But so far, the major limitation we have here, like all the technology is there, the major limitation is ethics. So far, of course, it's not allowed to do that in humans, but there are some proposals, and research-wise, it's already being done in primates, like in monkeys, and there are, some research being done to try and replicate neuronal patterns with light, so very precise stimulations, so that you would sort of skip a missing neuron or something, so you would stimulate the brain and then end up with. And there are many more applications to that, but so far, because of the ethical issues, we are still, there are many applications in fundamental research already, so that's where we're standing.
Just to follow up on the ethical question, we're talking about modifying an embryo, right? And growing up, letting the child, I suppose, grow up to be a full human before we can do this sort of thing. Is it, I guess it would be infeasible to do this to someone who has some sort of debilitating disease?
So one of the limitations of using this is in animals, so there are many of course, but one or two I can think of. One is that to introduce like foreign DNA into a new organism, so far the most popular technique is to do that with viruses that have been totally inactivated, but we're still using viruses. So ethically speaking, we wouldn't do that in a human. But in some very few cases it's being done, like in stem cell research or things like this. But it's only at the research clinical stage, but it's one of the limits. Another limit used to be that it was very difficult to be sure of where you would introduce foreign DNA in mammals. A lot of knowledge has been acquired in flies, like insects and fish and things like this, but until 2013, it was very difficult to know exactly where you were putting DNA in a mammal. We would do it a lot in mice, but with CRISPR, exactly, now we can choose where we're going to insert the DNA. So, of course, in a human, you would never insert DNA randomly because you would be afraid of breaking a functional gene. In mice, for research, you can afford it. You would just select the mouse that survived. But in a human, you would never do that. Now that we can choose, the whole debate is open. But it's all ethical issues.
Just adding on this, what do you see the relevance of all this work in this neuroplasticity, concept of neuroplasticity? Is it like in line or it's really different?
It's exactly that. My project is to use this technology of having two fluorescent proteins on the same one to study what's happening in plasticity. So plasticity is the capacity of the brain to adapt to its environment, and I'm totally studying how the plasticity of the brain happens at the molecular level.
Rod?
Okay.
I just had a simple one. The videos you showed us of the activity that was lighting up in the brains, are those real time, or was that speeded up or slowed down?
Or Photoshop?
I never acquired in vivo data myself, so I can't be 100% sure. I know someone in the room who could answer, but my guess would be that it's real speed, light speed. But I would have to double check to make sure. Can I just add a little comment on the very first question about the applications that I just remembered? Totally unrelated to humans or animals, but I remember hearing one professor saying we could modify, and it's already done, we could modify plants that could shine, and we do it for research, but someone suggested that we could do it for trees in the street to make Christmas illuminations.
I wanted to, if in the case where in the first part of the presentation where the neurons were actually fluorescing, does it change the caloric requirement to run a brain? Do these mice have to eat more? Caloric requirement.
The energy requirement.
Energy?
Calorie.
Do they need to eat
the
more?
metabolism.
Yes.
Microphone. Yeah. So from all the research that has been done, I can't think of any issues related to like the neurons being more or less like energy-wise active. So I would say it's pretty. I mean, the impact is pretty minimal.
Yeah. Thank you.
Also, in terms of toxicity, like you could shine it for days in those animals, and they don't get sick every week.
And here.
Hello. I wanted to ask back to the mouse again. So to kind of put it short, you used light to stimulate the motor neurons. Could you stimulate other neurons to, or have you already done it to kind of induce other behaviors?
So I personally haven't, because I'm working on the first part where you use the light emitting proteins, not the light sensing proteins. But yeah, there's plenty of applications, and in fundamental research, one of them is to actually shine light in any brain area. This example was motor cortex, but you can shine it anywhere, and then see what behavior or what result you end up with to know what this area is involved in. And you can go smaller because you can choose which cell type you are going to stimulate. It's not just an area. Then you can choose a neuron that is chemically different for another and only stimulate this one, because even in the same area you can have different cell types. You have some excitatory neurons, some inhibitory neurons. You have some in the same that start in the same place, but then will project and send information to different areas. So now you can select which one. So in terms of basic science, there's way more than this. Like this one is kind of a proof of principle that you can do it on this big scale of a whole mouse. But then you can do way more.
Yeah, you can even incept memories in mice.
Yeah, using this technique, you can. So first, I mean, it was already pretty easy to erase memories, but using this technique, they managed, by reproducing the same light pattern as the neuron was doing electrically, they managed to recreate a memory, or even to create a memory that was not there at all. So they placed a mouse in an environment that was not scary, but because they had been shining a light pattern that they recorded in an environment that was scary for the mouse because it was receiving electrical shocks, it started getting scared in the non-scary environment just because of the light.
So far, you've been showing us how it works with optical, with visible light. Have there been like experiments with non-visible electromagnetic radiation?
I was going to say yes, sure, because I was going to think about UV or infrared, but so UV, no, because it's toxic. Infrared, yes, it's actually very much done because it can go deeper in the brain than green and blue. Electromagnetic, I know there is some research in electromagnetic stimulation, but I'm not sure it goes through, the effect of a protein sensitive to that. I'm sure there are some organisms that are sensitive to the electric field. I'm just not sure if it's mediated by a protein. So I just to be safe, I'm not going to answer.
One more? Anybody? Going once?
So you showed us neurons and oligodendrocytes. What about glial cells and astrocytes?
Yeah, so oligodendrocytes and astrocytes are glial cells, and they were the green and the red cells that I showed in the picture. The neurons were blue, but so glial cells is anything that is not a neuron and is in the brain. And there are 3 other cell types of neurons, and I showed 2 in green and red. So you can study by making neurons one color and astrocytes, for example, another color. You can study their interaction, and then if those colors are sensitive to like calcium or acidity or anything else, then you can see like when calcium rises in one cell type, then what happens to acidity in the other cell type, or whatever question you have, you can combine. Absolutely.
Cool stuff. Let's thank Morgane again. And we're back in 20 with Eli. Stick around.
get some light? Thank you. So, good evening, nerds, fellow Tokyoites, friends. Thank you for the introduction. My name's Eli K. William, and tonight I'm going to be talking to you about the Jubilee Cycle trilogy. I do not, in fact, need glasses for vision correction. These are computer glasses to reduce blue light. I'm only wearing them tonight in honor of this most nerdy occasion. The title of my talk is Narrative Frames and Technological Discovery, or how trapping my protagonist in an elevator gave birth to a crypto privacy protection agency. I'm going to begin by briefly introducing the Jubilee Cycle trilogy, giving special attention to Book 1, Cash Crash Jubilee. I'm then going to tell you a story about how in one of my earlier drafts of this novel, my main character got stuck in an elevator and I couldn't figure out how to get him out again. I'll proceed to describe the way I finally liberated him, before concluding with some suggestions excuse me, on how my story about storytelling might be relevant outside the realm of fiction. So first, the Jubilee Cycle. So these are the first two books of the Jubilee Cycle. This is Book 1, Cash Crash Jubilee. This is Book 2, The Naked World. And I'm currently writing Book 3, A Diamond Dream. In reviews, my work is often referred to as cyberpunk. For those of you who've not heard this word before, this is a subgenre of science fiction that is, it was born in the 80s. It's characterized by a punk aesthetic, technological modification of the body, and virtual realities, often referred to as cyberspace. As you'll see later in the talk, the Jubilee Cycle incorporates these genre elements to a certain extent, but I think it's better thought of as part of the dystopian tradition than as cyberpunk. Dystopia is just ancient Greek for something like bad place. And dystopian fiction is defined by its bleak setting, usually a future dominated by some sort of oppressive society. Typical examples of dystopian novels include George Orwell's 1984, Aldous Huxley's A Brave New World, Margaret Atwood's Oryx and Crake, Zamyatin's We, and so on. Authors of... this is from the SF Encyclopedia, online SF Encyclopedia that is, and this is how my work is described. So cyberpunk inflected dystopian science fiction. Yeah. Authors of dystopian fiction may have all sorts of reasons for choosing to write in this genre. Maybe they delight in imagining grim, miserable realities, or get kicks out of watching their characters suffer in them. Maybe their best ideas just happen to be really depressing. But I think what motivates many writers to choose the dystopian mode is a concern about the course of human progress and the dangers inherent in technological development. By imagining a future in which humankind takes a horribly wrong turn, they hope to bring attention to certain trends in the present that they believe are leading us astray. In my case, when I started writing the Jubilee Cycle about 15 years ago, I mostly just wanted to tell a good story. But I would be dishonest if I said that I wasn't also concerned about the direction our species is going on this planet. The Jubilee Cycle takes place in a future Tokyo in which all actions are intellectual properties owned by corporations that charge licensing fees. All actions are intellectual properties owned by corporations that charge licensing fees. So whenever you do anything, hop, skip, jump, talk, take a sip of your drink, watch a presentation, you will be paying a certain amount of money to someone. In the first book of the series, Cash Crash Jubilee, our main character, Amon Kenzaki, works as a liquidator. His job is to cash crash those who've gone bankrupt. This involves apprehending them, surgically removing the implanted computer system that connects them to the action-transaction economy, and banishing them to the bank death camps. In order to save up enough money to visit a mysterious forest that appears in his dreams, Amon becomes obsessed with career success and with frugality. He tries not to blink too much, to breathe too much, to to step on expensive patches of sidewalk, to use expensive words, and so on. Everything seems to be going well for Amon until he's charged for an incredibly expensive action called Jubilee. Amon is certain that he hasn't performed this action, and in the process of trying to get a refund, his life and everything he thought he knew about the world begins to crumble. So that's the basic idea of Book 1, Cash Crash Jubilee. Let me just quickly introduce the other two books. So The Naked World. So Cash Crash Jubilee came out in 2015. This came out in November 2017. And without giving too much away, The Naked World is about Amon's journey to the largest bank death camp on Earth, the District of Dreams, and his efforts to expose an awful secret hidden by the Philanthropy Syndicate, which supplies the bank dead poor people who live in the District of Dreams. A Diamond Dream, the final book in the series, which, as I said, I'm currently writing. In this book, Amon emerges from the bank death camps and confronts the iniquities of his society, and we finally learn the meaning of Jubilee, the forest, the fate of his friends, and other ongoing mysteries of the series. So, from the time I conceived the idea behind the Jubilee cycle, namely actions as intellectual properties, until publication of Cash Crash Jubilee, 10 years had passed. During most of that time, I was working on other things, but in total, this first book took approximately 4 years of sustained writing as I went through many drafts before I was satisfied. In one of the earlier drafts, I conceived of the action-transaction system in the following way. Just a moment ago, I mentioned the implanted computer system that connects citizens to the economy. These are called body banks, and they consist of a network of biological sensors and chips integrated with the human body. Body banks have two main functions. First, they connect citizens to the Imanet, which is a network of audio-visual information and images that covers everything. You can think of it as something like cyberspace, except instead of existing in a separate reality, it's pasted on top of this one. More importantly for our purposes tonight, the second function of the body bank is to transmit action data. Body bank sensors record each citizen's movements and nerve signals and send the resulting data to the Global Action Transaction Authority, also known as GATA, which ensures they're charged the correct amount for the action. But what happens to the action data after GATA receives it? How exactly is it processed? This is where the Ministry of Monitoring comes in. Whenever anyone does anything, an organization within GATA called the Ministry of Monitoring receives their action data and checks to see whether it matches any action property in their database. It then authorizes the mega conglomerate or megaglom that owns the action property to withdraw the correct fee from the actor's account. Most matching between action data and action properties is performed automatically by algorithms. However, these sometimes fail with difficult cases, so human operators have to step in sometimes. In addition to the Ministry of Monitoring, GATA is composed of 5 other institutions, including the Liquidation Ministry, where Amon works as a liquidator, but I'm not going to burden you with details. What concerns us tonight is the way that GATA, with the help of the Body Bank and the Ministry of Monitoring, realizes a surveillance system so pervasive that it can monitor the actions of every citizen on Earth at every moment, in order to ensure that they're always paying the correct amount. Brilliant, I thought when I came up with this. Action monitoring, very dystopian, very cool, right? Problem. My main character, Mom, got stuck in an elevator and I couldn't get him out again. I can't tell you much about what led to his getting stuck in the elevator without spoiling the story. Suffice it to say that some very dangerous people are chasing him, and the only way he can get away is by boarding a particular elevator. The problem arose for me because these dangerous people happen to wield influence over both wealthy megagloms or mega conglomerates and the Global Action Transaction Authority. All they have to do is pay the GATA action monitors enough money and they'll have Amon's action data just like that. This must include location data because location is essential for determining the difference between certain actions. For example, for GATA to tell the difference between taking a step and trespassing, it needs to know whether someone is in a forbidden area, and so on. In short, the dangerous people pursuing my main character could easily find out exactly what he's doing and where he's doing it at every moment. I racked my brain for any possible way to get around this. I considered all the means at Amon's disposal and tried to imagine the many ways that other characters and events might intervene to save him, but I came up empty. There was simply no escape for Amon. They would catch him, and there was nothing I, as author, could do about it. The Jubilee Cycle. Half a book about a dude who gets caught into an elevator and gets caught by the dangerous people. The end. That was it. My story was over right there, unless I could think of something. At the time, this seemed like the worst thing that could happen to an aspiring novelist. I despaired that my career in literature was over before it had even begun. But I would later learn that writing your character into a corner is a common trick used by thriller writers. I heard about this first at a talk given by a fellow Tokyo-based author who writes thrillers named Barry Lancet. Writing your character into a corner, into a situation that you can't get them out of, is supposed to stimulate your imagination and force you to come up with fresh ideas. So, how to get Amon out of the elevator? If nothing he or any of the characters might do would help him. Rewrite reality, of course. What I needed was a way to protect my character's action data, including his location, from the megaglons and from Gata, so that the dangerous people couldn't get their hands on it. The solution? Here, in addition to the Ministry of Monitoring and the other 5 governmental organs I already showed you, Gata would now have a crypto privacy protection agency, the House of Blinding. So how does this work? I'm actually not going to talk to you about this. This is, I created this when I was writing the book because I got really confused. Okay, so the House of Blinding is a semi-independent organization within Gata. All citizens transmit their action data to the House of Blinding along with a code that uniquely identifies them called an identity signature. You can think of the identity signature as something like an IP address. The House of Blinding alters the action data to remove all personally identifying information and encrypts the identity signature before transmitting both data and signature to the Ministry of Monitoring. Okay, so people wear body banks. The body banks record the motions that they're performing. That becomes action data. The action data is sent to the House of Blinding. The House of Blinding, it's sent to the House of Blinding along with the identity signature. Both the action data and the identity signature are encrypted and sent to the Ministry of Monitoring. So the result is that Gata can check whether a person's action data matches an action property without having any information about that person's identity. In other words, action monitoring is totally anonymous. Gata knows what every person on Earth is doing at every moment without knowing who any of them are. Revising such a central institution necessitated a number of other changes, and the world of the Jubilee Cycle became a very different place. This was no longer a surveillance society that might have given even Orwell chills, as citizens now had anonymity rights and would retain ownership of their own action data. So what about these dangerous people pursuing Amon? Now there's no way for them to use Gata to find out who or where he is. This means it's possible for him to escape from the elevator, though not guaranteed. I still had to think hard how exactly I would get him out, because they could still catch him the old-fashioned way, by chasing him down. And you can read chapter 17 if you're interested in seeing what I came up with. But the important point is that the story did not end. It could go on until a proper narrative resolution could be found. That is for another 2.5 books. So my desire to keep the story going, after I wrote my main character into a corner, forced me to rewrite the reality of my fictional world from the ground up and bring the technological and political system of the series to a higher level of sophistication. So what? I built a world, drafted a plot, had a problem following through with it, sorted it out. Isn't this just the particular problem of a novelist? What does this have to do with all of us, with nerds, you ask? Well, So far, I've been telling you a story about how I go about telling stories. In other words, my talk has remained within the frame of a story within another story. But allow me to step out of this narrative frame and consider what this example of narrative problem solving might mean for the world outside fiction, the one we all inhabit in our daily lives. Following this line of thought, allow me to suggest that in a figurative sense, we are all trapped in an elevator. What do I mean? The course of history is shaped to a large extent by the ideas we cherish, consciously or unconsciously, and the reality these ideas allow us to inhabit. On the basis of certain ways of thinking and their corresponding technologies, humankind has built a global civilization that we all now take part in and that has given rise to catastrophic problems. You've heard it all before. Global warming, nuclear annihilation, resource depletion through overpopulation. Pick your disaster. We are locked on a course that threatens the existence of the communities we belong to, our species, and many others besides. We finally awaken to the fact that we've written ourselves into a corner, and our imaginations have been stimulated, but it's all too little too late. Some people hold on to an optimistic belief that technological progress will solve our problems. And technologies will undoubtedly be essential to any solution we might find, but they alone are not enough. For decades, we've had technologies that might have steered us away from global warming, such as solar power and the electric car, and yet have failed to use them on a mass scale and develop them until only recently. For decades, we've had the technologies to disassemble nuclear weapons, and yet megalomaniacs at the head of nuclear powers now trade barbs through social media. Progressing on our current course will not get us out of this mess, whatever technologies we develop. Minor tweaks and adjustments are will-o'-the-wisps on our treacherous path. I wish I had the answers, but somehow we need to work together to rewrite our deeper storyline and make a sincere effort to tell it through our actions. We need to reshape the reality we share from its roots, to redesign our social, political, and economic systems in ways not yet tried or maybe even imagined. This is the only way to escape from the elevator of our own making. Otherwise, the dangers we have unleashed will catch up with us, and our story is over. Thank you very much.
Heavy, heavy stuff.
How many of y'all just want to lie down right now and die?
I promised I would steal the first question. Bank death camps.
I didn't promise you nothing, first of all. We wrote that conversation.
I promised I would steal it.
You have a question about it?
I just want to make sure I heard those three words correctly.
Bank death
in the
camps.
correct sequence.
Yeah.
Okay. That was the question.
Bank death camps.
Do you want an explanation of it, or just wanted to know? That is a word that's used frequently throughout the series.
Okay, it just seemed unfortunately plausible in the real world.
Thank you.
Gents.
Take that as a compliment.
So I just have a question about the premise of your novel.
Yes. I can't see who's speaking.
Here.
Sorry. Thank you.
So you're talking about intellectual property in a sense.
Yes.
What is your feeling in general about the usefulness of IP? Is it something that you, in the case of like patents, in the case of copyrights, is it something that you are suspicious of yourself?
Of intellectual property itself?
Or is it just being carried to an extreme? Is there something in the world today that makes you feel that intellectual property is threatened in some ways?
Intellectual property itself. I've never thought of intellectual property itself as threatening. I think there's a difficult question about, what to do with regards to certain types of intellectual property due to things like the internet, which allows copying, endless copying, and instant transmission of things that maybe have copyright on them, for example. So there are a lot of questions about the relevancy of intellectual property, but I don't find intellectual property itself as threatening, and it's possible that it may be continue to be, and actually likely will continue to be an important part of any kind of future system that we come up with to deal with the new technologies that are emerging. That would be my thought. Yeah, but yes, taken to an extreme, there's an issue about the ways in which rents are used to extract money from communities, and so it's more an issue about how intellectual property can play sort of system.
I don't precisely remember the title of the movie, but I think it's THX 138 or so.
Oh, the George Lucas movie?
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you know it?
Yeah, I saw it.
Okay, good. I saw it recently, and I wonder, are there any outcasts in your kind of system? I call it system, not society.
The bank dead people, the bank dead,
yeah.
they're outcasts.
And they form a different world. And what is the role of free will in this whole?
So the theme of the entire series is what is freedom, basically. I mean that's what it's about. So
to which degree is self-awareness as we consider it to be today?
To which degree is I'm not sure if I understand the question.
Do the people understand themselves as we understand ourselves, or do they have some kind of different state, meta state? Do they have a different stage of development? Is there anything else in there that
first you asked about the outcasts. Okay, so the first book, Cash Crash Jubilee, is set in Tokyo. The whole series is set in Tokyo, but it's set in Tokyo in a sort of like really, I mean, they're part of the action transaction economy, so everything that the characters are doing costs money, and they're surrounded by all of this digital information all the time. So it's very overwhelming and sort of, very overwhelming. The second book is about the bank death camps. It takes place there mostly. And so it's about the outcasts, and they are very different because they're disconnected from the whole system, the action transaction economy, and also this immanent, the digital cyberspace-like world. So both of them are very different in terms of, I guess, I think you're asking a question about human nature, or, but are they different from us? Is that what you want to know from people today?
Yes.
Yeah, well, I mean, we're shaped a lot by the technologies that we use, right? So they're using different technologies, so I think the people who are using the technologies are shaped in a different way than us, I guess. And there are people also at certain points in the series who are subject to genetic alteration as well, so they're also different. But I'm not going to get into that because it's in the third book.
One last outcast question: do they try to get them back? For example, like in the movie of George Lucas, it was about him basically getting out of this.
Yeah, it's totally, my series is totally, it's not people trapped, like, they were like underground, and at the end they like come out and they see the sun. It's not like that. They're not underground, they're in the city in Tokyo. Like, each chapter of the first book moves.
So you can choose whether you're in or out?
You can choose to go bankrupt if you're in, and then you'll be in the bank death camps. And if you're in the bank death camps, no, you can't choose. You're stuck there.
Thanks.
Melvin?
So it seems like you set out to write a very dystopian novel, but in having to rewrite the premise of your novel, how much did it shift, if any, from anywhere between the spectrum of dystopia to utopia or something?
That's a great question. I actually chopped part of the presentation out that dealt with that question. So originally, before I created The House of Blinding, I had misgivings about the novel because I really like 1984 by George Orwell, and I felt like he kind of nailed it with surveillance societies, right? Like, there are other novels. I think Cory Doctorow's The Little Brother is an interesting novel in certain ways, but I think a lot of novels kind of overdo the surveillance society thing, and I felt like maybe I was overdoing it. So introducing The House of Blinding helped me feel better about that it's no longer a surveillance society. Well, it is in a way, but it's an anonymous system. So that did shift it potentially over to in a utopian direction, very slightly. But I found a way to justify it within the basic premise of the novel. So the reason that the House of Blinding fits in, excuse me, is that individuals, because intellectual property is heavily protected, they have a right to their own action data. And so if Gata can just see who they are and see their action data, then that's infringing on their property rights, on individual property rights. So it has a basis within the sort of premise of the system of the novel. And
you a while ago, and I already know the answer, but I think everyone deserves to know. For writers and aspiring writers, I mean, where did you get your book published, basically?
The series, so I'm contracted with an American publisher called Skyhorse. It's a medium-sized publisher. They're based in New York City. I'm on the Talos label, which is a speculative fiction label. Yeah.
Hey, do you write much about the world outside the action transaction economy? Like you said, it's based mostly in Tokyo, but are there other economies?
Oh, within the series?
Yeah, I guess so.
So the entire series is based in Tokyo. So other economies outside the action transaction economy? Yes, that's in the second book. But I've been giving away a lot if I told you about it. And it's called the charity gift economy in the second book. So there's that.
Not unlike our sharing economy dystopia we have now. Don.
Okay, so I mean this in the nicest way. Not all writers are the smartest person on the planet.
That definitely applies to me.
Okay, so when you have a problem with your characters, you are not a conglomerate of the smartest people on the planet. So how do you deal with the fact that surely someone, one of the 7 billion people on the planet, would have thought of a solution, and it just hasn't come to you yet because you're not 7 billion people collectively applying your intelligence towards solving societal problems?
Oh, you're talking about reality or fiction?
You had to rewrite reality.
So are you talking about reality or fiction? Are we inside the narrative frame or outside?
The writing process. So you have a problem. I was stuck in an elevator.
See, I'm not even smart enough to understand this question.
This is possibly user error. So Amon is stuck in an elevator.
Yeah.
He has a problem.
Yeah.
So how do you as a writer deal with the fact that maybe Amon, the character, could have thought of a way out of the problem, but you as the author have to resort to rewriting the rules of reality?
Oh. Yeah, well, shoot. I don't know how you even answer that. Yeah, because, damn. Amon, so you think that Amon is like, that fictional characters have independent existences, like independent of their authors and readers?
There are many times where I read a book and I say, well, this character just did something moronic, and any idiot could see that this was the solution, but the author didn't.
So
do you
I take a lot of time. So I take a lot of time to write my novels because I kind of obsessively think of like all kinds of possibilities, and I want to make sure that the world is consistent, and also that the characters are acting consistently within the world. So yeah, it's entirely possible that somebody else, because I don't think Amon could think of anything, because he's just words on a page that come to life when people read the symbols. So that's how I think of him anyway. But I think that other people, other than me, may be able to think of more plausible choices. It's entirely possible, yeah. And that actually probably, if enough people read the novel, they will find, little niggling holes in it, or maybe major holes that I've overlooked. I don't know. That, I think, inevitably happens.
Final question, anybody?
So, getting back to the world inside the book, what is the benefit of being part of this economy? Because presumably,
I get this question a lot. So, part of it is that the way that the people in the action transaction economy are raised, they believe that there's a lot of benefits to being in it, and so you'll see that in the first book. So from our perspective, having lived in this society, it doesn't seem very attractive. But the other thing is that the only other option is the bank death camps. So you're either in or you're out.
Cake or death.
I understood the world you set up, but I mean, like, we can see from 1984, we can pretty closely imagine how they got to that place. You just have to scare people enough, and they'll go, yeah, it's better if someone's watching us. That's why we have closed circuit TV cameras. So, I mean, you don't get from the whole history, but like, what what is the advantage of being in that economy, presuming that it wasn't always 100%? Like that was how it was set up.
Yeah, how did it get there?
Yeah, was it just to connect? Like people wanted to feel connected.
So in the series, there are a few different histories that are proposed, and none of them are necessarily definitive. So there are plausible histories that appear within the series, to a certain extent, but some of it's left vague intentionally, because history is never 100% right, and so that's also true of my world.
Did you have?
I freaking muted that. Just going back to the last question, you said, well, what's the benefits of being that economy? And you said, well, they don't know anything else. Do you see that as like an allegory for like modern consumerism and materialism?
So some people who've read my series describe it as an allegory for today. I didn't think about it that way when I wrote it, but a number of people have said that it's like an allegory for today. Sorry, I'm not sure how you got to that conclusion from it.
What was the conclusion? I couldn't hear.
Oh, he said, so there's something better than what we have now, right?
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah, so, yeah. I don't know the answer to that. I'm just a writer of fiction.
Elizabeth, last. Okay, fine. Fine then. Let's then hope for a better tomorrow. So let's give a round of applause.
My series is really a lot more fun than it sounds.
You can buy your life book. Thank you, Eli, Rod, and Morgan. Woohoo!
Thank you very much.
Feel free to stick around, have another drink, and we're back on February 9th. Hope to see you then. Thanks.
I'm trying to think what other news I ought to be telling you, since I haven't seen you.
So how does this work right here? This is a good thing? Nope, too bright. You're very welcome. All right, folks, we're out of here. Good night. Thank you for coming. We'll see you next time in February. Yes, I'm going to press a button.